Welcome to the Man Rules Podcast. If you're looking to live with more intention, build connection, and live a more authentic, meaningful life, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Dan Griffin. I don't know about you, but it seems to me that they keep changing the rules for us men without telling us. So each week, I just throw out the rule book and cover the tough topics about the real issues that men face. At the end of the day, I'm not here to tell you what kind of man you're supposed to be. I'm here to help you make your own rules and become the kind of man you want to be. So let's jump in. All right, so here we are for another episode of the Man Rules Podcast. I'm here with my friend and colleague, Rob Weiss, who has really done some wonderful work around men's sexuality, healthy sexuality, relationships, intimacy. So Rob, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
It's great to have you here. I'm sure there's lots that we can talk about. For sure, we'll find some time to talk about your new book, Out of the Doghouse. I was honored to write the foreword for it, but tell our listeners a little bit about the book.
Well, this is a kind of a great way, Dan, to start entering the man rules conversation because, as you mentioned, I'm a gay guy and I'm a professional. I've been in the field for therapy and sexology and treatment field for like 25 years. And I entered for reasons having to do with a gay man, being a gay man, which had to do with HIV, transmission in the 80s and my concerns about it. So it's really interesting to be in 2015 and writing books for heterosexual couples to deal with cheating. That's a long way from where I started. But I do want to say just briefly about Doghouse, and we may talk about it later, that I really felt like, as a man, that I have a lot in common with men who cheat, whether I'm gay or straight. And I know what the thinking I've worked with unfaithful couples really for a very long time. In fact, I would say that the majority of my experience as a therapist has been working with relationships that were torn apart by infidelity. And when I see the ways that men who have hurt a loved one by cheating approach trying to heal that relationship, I just universally don't see men doing a very good job. And so I wanted to write a book that helped men understand what a woman goes through when she feels betrayed by cheating or infidelity, and then what it takes to heal that relationship. I just don't see that men get it, and I've been working with them a very long time. So Doghouse is about healing cheating from a man's perspective.
And I will say, maybe not necessarily in defense of men, but it makes sense that men don't get it. It makes sense that men struggle with that level of intimacy and unwrapping sex and sexuality from our sense of intimacy and connection. And we can talk more about that. What I do want to say about the book is that there are lots of ways somebody could have written this book. It could have been a little too soft, maybe, for men and let them off the hook too much, or it could have been probably the opposite, which we see a lot in books like this, which would have been shaming and reinforcing this idea that there's something wrong with men. And you did a great job of balancing the idea of the accountability with a degree of compassion. And so it was really straight talk for these guys in the book. But at no point when I was reading it and my decision to write the foreword to it felt like this is a guy who's honoring men's experience and in that wants to support them in making changes and just not going to bullshit them.
I don't think that men respond well to bullshit. I think they see through pretty quickly. Bottom line is, I think guys need straight talk. I think they need to hear what the deal is and what they need to look at and what they need to do. And, you mentioned, Dan, that there are a lot of books about cheating or infidelity that are maybe a little kind of finger-wagging, kind of like, pointing a finger and shaming. And I have to say, with all due respect, that most of those books are written by women. And so really, how many books are written about to help men heal cheating that are written by men? I don't even know if there are any. So the idea to take a man's voice, to get inside a man's head, and being a man, and being able to say, hey, I know why you cheated. I get it completely. And I would have done the same thing and looked good to me. And, had I been in your place. But let's take a step back and look at how that might have been thought through differently. And if you'd had more perspective and maybe had a different kind of relationship with your partner. And you're right, that's not shaming. The word you used, the word compassionate, I would say empathy. Like, I'm really trying to get men to understand and have empathy for what a woman goes through when she's betrayed. So they just don't call her that crazy witch who won't leave me alone.
Yeah. No, and I was thinking the same thing. And I don't think it's offensive or overly critical or whatever to see that the majority of those books have been written, just as the majority of books about relationships have been written by women attempting to dictate to men how they're supposed to show up in relationships, which is why I wrote my book. And I think that's a shift we're seeing in our culture today, is men are standing up and using their voices in much healthier and authentic ways in areas that have been not necessarily as well communicated, delineated, or expressed in the past. And that is around being a father, being in relationships, anger and violence, cheating and infidelity, a lot of different areas. Men, I think, are really getting a nice, healthy, authentic voice.
It's interesting that you say that, Dan, because I think we live at a time that is overly patriarchal in terms of our politics and the way our world is running. I think we're living in a world that doesn't value women's values nearly enough. I don't see, and I don't think there are many people who would disagree, who are listening, that we could be more compassionate, that we could work to build relationships rather than fight, that we could work to be in coalition rather than going off on our own. And when I think of compassion and coalition building and communication and community building, I think of women's skills. And so it's interesting. I agree with you that while at the same time there are those men who are aware, who maybe are the children of the first feminist men, you know, we have a very different perspective and are very willing to get in there with women and try to understand their experience, acknowledging that it's different than ours. But I don't necessarily see that going on in the larger culture, which I think is the reason you're seeing women marching and stuff, is they don't feel their voice and their beliefs are being, you know, spoken to in the larger picture.
You know, I talked in a previous episode with Terry Real. You know, he's done some amazing work in this area. He and I have a very similar perspective in that in many ways what's happening today politically and culturally is very possibly the death throes of patriarchy, in the sense that there is this very virulent and vitriolic, reactive kind of voice out there. And it comes from multiple places. Men have felt, particularly white, heterosexual men, lower socioeconomic, working class men, have felt very rejected, marginalized, and even, you know, people treating them very paternalistically, but also like very as if they are everything that's wrong. I think we're seeing this dichotomy play out very strongly in men's lives. And that is, there are the men who are moving toward a more healthy, conscious masculinity. And then there are men who, for whatever reason, they're hurt and they're scared, but they are clinging to the man rules because it's what they know and it's what helps them feel safe. And their life experience just hasn't been such that they really see value in a different way.
Well, you bring up a very interesting idea about men and women, Dan, and masculine and feminine, because I was just listening to something yesterday on the radio, and someone was talking about how when cultures or people feel unsafe, they move much more toward what I would consider masculine values, you know, fighting, putting up walls, being defensive, looking out for ourselves, you know, that kind of thing. And when someone feels safe in life, or a culture feels safe, they're much more open to a mixture of what I would consider to be male and female strengths, and are willing to compromise, willing to see the contrasts and the grays, willing to be more coalition focused. But when you don't feel safe, you reach for your weapon. You know, it's kind of how it goes. And so clearly we're living in a culture that doesn't feel safe. And there are lots of reasons for that. But unfortunately, it seems to lead to people, as you said, clinging to or leaning into traditional masculine roles of fighting and one-upping and competing and being right.
I might suggest that those values that you're talking about, I don't know that I want to call them masculine virtues as much as they're patriarchal virtues. And to me, that's an important distinction, because I think we can find cultures where there's a kind of healthier, or even subcultures in this country where there's a healthier masculinity. And that's not necessarily how people show up, but I think it's still unclear. I think we're in this gender question, and I think that brings us into this space where gay men and straight men and maybe even transgender men are trying to figure out how to live in a world where gender is being quickly deconstructed more in a way than it ever has been.
Which is the internet. You know, I mean, when I grew up in my little neighborhood, in my little arena, and I watched my one a newscaster and I read my one local newspaper, and maybe I went to the library for information about the world, I was very limited by my immediate cultural references as to how much information I was going to get about how the world was and who I am. But now with the internet, we know everything about everybody. And there are lots of folks who don't like what they're seeing, are very uncomfortable with what they're seeing. There's a lot of clannishness and nationalism and all of that, in part springing out of us saying, wait a minute, all these people are very different. And we're not, I don't know if I like those people. And, anyway, I think we should talk about sex and relationships and this.
Well,
we can always talk about politics, but
we could talk about a whole lot, and I think that maybe for additional episodes or.
Well, Dan, here's the deal. I mean, I think your listeners probably hear enough on TV or wherever they're getting their information about politics and the state of the world. But what they don't, I believe, what people don't hear about enough is the dynamics of personal relationships and what helps us to heal and grow and love and make things better. Dan, I mean, I got to say, in the most basic way, I can't tell you how hard I had to study to get my driver's license. But nobody taught me, nor did I take a single lesson in how to be a parent, nor was it required.
Yeah.
And so the value that we place on how we raise our children, what we learn about what children need, there's so much. Anyway, I could get into it more.
No. I mean, it's really important, but it does bring us to this place of where we're wanting to go for this particular episode, because all of that is built around the man rules. All of this idea of how we've raised these boys over generations, it's all built in this space of not being as conscious as we could be about helping young men understand who they are as men, what it means to have a healthy masculinity, and as part of that, their connection to sex and intimacy.
Which is primarily porn right now.
Right.
And so, it's interesting. I was just in a conversation yesterday with a gentleman who's asking me the question, a sort of standard feminist question about porn, which is, isn't porn violating and abusive to women? And, while 30 years ago I would have universally said yes, now I think it's a different deal. I think there are many women who join porn, look at porn, we live in a different world. But what I don't hear being questioned, which really doesn't get questioned much, is how is this affecting men and boys' views of women? Because, you'll often hear me say, if you hear me lecture, that, I think schools teach our children a lot about the body parts and how they fit together and how you make babies and what is a disease and how do you get it. And that's important. And then porn shows our kids what sex is, at least as much as porn shows it to them. But who tells those kids that that's not really what sex is? That's adult entertainment. That's like Star Wars. You're not going to pull out a lightsaber because we don't have them, and nobody has genitals that big. And, this is all entertainment. And that sex most often in life, has something to do for us with connection and relationship. It's only a parent who's going to teach their child that. So how do you talk to a dad who's looking at porn regularly about what his son should and shouldn't believe about his looking at porn? It's a complicated issue when you have an unconscious parent and then you have a child who needs to be given information that the parent doesn't necessarily have.
Well, and it's so deeply connected to our culture's ideas about sex and sexuality. In particular, yes, I'm absolutely concerned when it comes to porn about what we're teaching young boys and men about what to think about women, but we're also teaching them what to think about themselves, what to think about other men, and what to think about sex and their bodies. It's really horrible that porn is filling the vacuum that nobody else wants to own responsibility for, which is helping young men love their bodies and embrace a healthy sexuality.
Well, again, I think that we're no longer in a culture where parents can say, well, I think my kid knows enough about sex from the internet or being in school. I don't have to talk to them about it. I don't think any parent. In fact, it's interesting, we have books now, and I don't think a lot of parents know this, that are, how to talk to your 6-year-old about what's online, how to talk to your 11-year-old, so that the parents have guides toward how to help their kids understand what they're seeing. Because, there isn't a child in America who's not looking at porn. It's funny when I talk to audiences as you do, Dan. I got a couple hundred people in front of me, therapists often, and I'll say, how many of you think your children are not looking at porn? And usually a dozen or so people raise their hands, and I just look at them like, I think you're wrong. I don't think, I know you think your precious, wonderful child would be the one child in America who's not looking at porn, but all kids are looking at porn. And so how do they derive meaning from it? How do they understand its place? How do they understand that isn't what's real? I mean, that takes people they love and trust to explain to them. And that's the part that concerns me.
Totally agree. So let's talk about this idea of what we're teaching. How do we as men learn how to connect in healthy ways? And of course, so much porn is not only does it have a misogynist flavor to it, I think there's also a strong homophobic flavor sometimes, or of course, it valorizes women on women, but you never see any of that emphasis about any kind of sexual interaction or sexual behavior between men. And you also get this kind of masculine role that I think pervades a degree of not of homophobia, but certainly of inferred hyper masculinity and straightness.
Yeah, I think you're talking. Something tells me you've seen some heterosexual porn,
well,
because when you look at homosexual porn, you see not only man on man, but you see men in lace, you see men in leather, you see men in all kinds of sort of gender bending, sexual identity changing. There isn't quite as much, I think, rigidity around those kinds of roles, and so you see all kinds of interesting things.
No, that's a great point. That's a great point. That's my own heteronormative stuff.
But I think the point that we're making, Dan, and the one that I want to make sure we underlie or underscore is that porn can hurt boys too. It's kind of like back in the day we used to think, the girl who is touched by a man when she's 14, she's being molested. But the boy who has a babysitter who's seductive, who's 20, and he's 14, well, he's lucky.
Yeah.
And, that's a mistake of the culture in terms of how we understand what men need to know and learn about sex. But in a way, it's kind of repeated with porn, because we say, and I hear all the time, women are being abused, women are being treated badly, women are being displayed in ways that are not safe, that are not real. And I agree with all that. I do. But we really don't talk about how negatively that 14-year-old boy, that 15-year-old boy, that 16-year-old boy is going to be affected for the rest of his life by these images that he's looking at 3 or 4 times a week.
Yeah. It's the both and, right? That people just don't want to seem to embrace. It's that, yes, it's harmful to women and it's harmful to men and harmful to young men. And to me, what I don't think we talk about enough is that, of course, men are turning to porn. Porn makes sense from the way we're raised around relationships, intimacy, and sex. I mean, porn's like the perfect lover.
I'll take a pass on that, but I will say that I think porn certainly fits into the times. We don't have time to date a lot of people. We don't have time to do a lot of romancing. Couples don't necessarily have the time to even create foreplay. Everything is moving faster. I mean, when I used to come home pre-internet, I was done with my day. And now I come home and there's 50 emails waiting for me from work that weren't there when I left work.
Right.
And I don't know anybody, and I would say you're included, Dan, who doesn't feel like they're kind of working all the time. If the phone rings on Saturday, it's someone from work, so be it. If you get an email on Sunday afternoon, it's important from work, you'll answer. That is very different than it was in the past. And so if so much of our time is spent in this kind of whirl of social and work interaction related to the internet, I think we have a little less time for romancing, for, enjoying sexuality. Porn is the perfect kind of short fix. It's like having a health bar, when you want dinner, but that's all you can grab is that little protein bar. I think porn is kind of like that. But eventually you really do need to have dinner.
Well, and I don't know if it's just straight men or how it fits for gay men as well, but I can tell you that when I said that porn is like the perfect lover, I mean, I'm very serious. Porn doesn't care how you feel. Porn doesn't care how you treat it. Porn doesn't need you to cuddle. Porn is available all the time. Porn doesn't care what size you are. Porn this, porn this, porn this. And that's what men find themselves, unfortunately, a lot of straight men, because I know this from working with a lot of these guys, they're turning for intimacy and emotional kind of release, not just sex, not just getting off, but it's almost like they're going in rejection and isolation and loneliness to porn.
Well, what you're saying, Dan, and I think it's pretty obvious, but it's worth noting, porn is not relational. Porn doesn't teach you how to love someone or even what you need to be loved. Porn merely presents images that arouse you and allow you to reach orgasm. So the information that's needed to conduct healthy, and we're seeing this in therapy, the information that is actually needed to conduct healthy dating relationships, healthy intimate relationships. I mean, I hate being an ageist. I don't believe that things are worse now than they were when I was growing up, or that they were better back in the old days. But I do have to say that, there was a path to sex when you were 15, when I was a kid, and it had to do with dating and getting to know someone, whether you liked it or not. And I have to say that most guys got to know a girl or boy because they wanted to have sex with them, not because they necessarily wanted to get to know them, but they weren't going to get to have sex with them unless they got to know them. And in that process, they learned the social skills of dating, the social skill, holding a hand is good, but putting your arm around this, that's too much. I have young men and women in their 20s coming in saying, I have never actually gone on a real date. I've met people for sex. I've looked at lots of porn. How do you start to date someone without leading with sex? And, that's just not a question I would have heard 20 years ago.
It's really interesting to notice how this is affecting generations. And then you and I had an interesting conversation some time ago about the social media and the younger generation and how well they're integrating it versus maybe our generation and how much we're struggling with it, I think. But maybe we're just redefining what dating and connection, and maybe we just need to figure that out in a new way.
So I want to tell you what I thought was a really fascinating story, and you can tell me what you think. I was in New York last week. I live in California, and I was promoting my book, and I was going to different magazines. And because I wrote a book about cheating, I brought Doghouse to various women's magazines. So I was going to Cosmo, and I was going to Women's Health and all that. And I got to Bustle, which is a pretty popular online women's site for the most part. The woman who was interviewing me, we were sitting and chatting. She's like a 28-year-old reporter, writer. And she said, "Oh, it's interesting that you're here now. This is app-free April." And I was like, "Well, tell me more about that." And this is what she said. She said, "I'm 27 years old, and I realized that I have never dated without a dating app. And so I asked my girlfriends in some of the meetings we have, how about you? And almost all of them my age, under 30, reported they'd never gone on a date with someone they hadn't met online or on an app. So they decided to have dating app free April, where they wouldn't be allowed to use an app for dating. And they did this last year, Bustle did, and they found that most of the women who joined it just didn't date. Spent the month of April not dating. Wow. So this year they came out and they said, okay, well, instead of trying to hook up online, or, you need to, this month in April, go to a party, go to a mixer, go to a singles. So they push these women into taking actions that involve meeting people in real time. Now, I don't have any judgment about this, but I have to say, when this woman looked at me, and she was clearly an adult, she'd been around the world, she got to college, she had a job, and she's saying to me, I've never dated without an app. I thought, wow, we have lived in such different worlds.
Well, I like how you said it, because it's different worlds. It's not, we can't really cast value judgment on it, because with some of these apps and some of these ways of meeting, people are finding effective ways to meet somebody that they're more likely to connect with than maybe we had previously. I mean, I certainly, in high school and in college, it was a hookup scene, and you were hooking up with somebody, whether it was from making out with them to having sex with them, based on, some instant attraction, and not really knowing anything about them other than the fact that you were playing a drinking game together, getting high together, or something like that. It seems that some of this technology is giving them an opportunity to have something in common. I mean, I'm not that keyed or clued into all of this, so
I agree with you. And the reason the book is called Closer Together, Further Apart is because I don't think we've really gone anywhere. We've just found new ways to connect, new ways to relate. They're not wrong. They're not right. I just thought it was fascinating that a woman would say, at that age, I mean, it never occurred to me as a 50-something-year-old that someone who was nearly 30 had never gone on a date with someone they just met.
Yeah.
It isn't that it's right or wrong or good or bad. It was just like, wow, how much things have changed.
Yeah.
That a nearly 30-year-old woman is telling me she's never gone on a date that a friend said you should go out with this guy, or that she met at a restaurant or a bar or a church. I mean, she's only dated men. And I agree with you. You're absolutely right. The chances of my going in a bar and meeting someone back in the past who had a lot in common with me was not nearly as promising as someone who goes on an app and looks at someone else's profile and sees that they actually have things in common, and they do share interests, and maybe they know people in common. Who knows? You have a lot better opportunity to enjoy that person than you do a stranger in a bar. So yeah, of course the apps are incredibly useful and helpful in that way. But I want to say to you that I didn't go to this young woman and say, how are you dating? And are you meeting people personally? I didn't play the older person. She came to me and she said, we're having this really interesting experience. It's called App Free April. And I was like, wow, wow, I didn't think you would have needed that,
So let me ask you a question to maybe move us closer to what at least our original idea that we were going to talk about. But I love that it's free flowing, so I'm not attached to us having to get there. But if you were a straight man shopping around your book, sharing your book with these women's magazines and online zines and online groups, do you think you would have found a different reception?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. I can say to you that I wrote a book for women's empowerment. I wrote a book for what I consider to be an immaturity in some men in not recognizing how their behavior affects someone they love. And so, I want to help grow these men into more mature, more available, more present partners. But in order to do that, they have to look at and experience in some way the pain that a woman goes through when they hurt them. And then they need to figure out how to make that better. And I don't think that guys innately know how to do that. At least straight men don't seem to. And I only say this because, Dan, I've worked with so many unfaithful couples. And, everybody goes to therapy and they try to fix their relationship and all that stuff. But there are a couple of simple things that would make everything so much easier. And I only say that because I see it in every single couple. And the majority of them, the issue that I see consistently is a cheating man's lack of empathy and understanding in the pain that he causes that woman. And since he misperceives the pain that he's caused her, he doesn't understand what it will take for her to heal. So he's been cheating on her, and he says, well, yeah, and then she finds out, and then he says, I'm sorry, and I didn't mean it, and I love you, and here's some flowers, and let's go to Jamaica. And that's fine, but she's still pissed. And 3 months later, she's still pissed. And he's really starting to say things like, it's been a couple of months. When are you going to get over this? Or give me a break? Or I'm not cheating anymore. And that's a man to just understand the degree of pain that this woman might go through, or what it takes to make it better. And Dan, I think I told you this, but I'm going to take a risk in being personal. I wanted to cheat about 10 years ago in my relationship. I found someone I thought was just fascinating, and he was a man, but I don't think it matters. And he was in my field, and he was cute, and he was attractive, and he was fun. And all of a sudden we were going for long walks. You know what long walks are like, and looking at the view and, spending time. And all of a sudden everything he said was wonderful, and everything I heard, and I couldn't stop thinking about him and all that. This is the beginning of an affair. And what I did with it, and I have to say, I feel really good about this, and this is a part of my healing, is rather than pursuing it, or at least having pursued it to that point, I then went to my partner, my husband, and I said, hey, I got to talk to you, and this isn't going to be fun. I've been meeting with this person and spending time with this person. I haven't had sex with them, but I really want to, and I really want to enter this relationship, and I want to see what it's all about. And I watched the man that I love fall apart. I watched the man that I love melt into the floor in tears and pain. He hurt so much, and I'll never forget it, that the dog came over and put his head in his lap. And that was not a fun moment for me to reveal that to the person that I love. But looking back, I understand now, first of all, I didn't go off with that person, and I didn't pursue that relationship. And it was in great part because I saw the pain that was going to be caused. We have this saying in recovery about addicts tend to ask forgiveness rather than permission. In other words, we kind of want to do what we want to do and we don't want anyone to tell us no. So we go ahead and do it. And then when we get in trouble, we say, sorry, 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 sorry. I don't think there is any man who cheats who doesn't on some level at some moment realize that this is going to hurt the woman that he loves. And he makes a decision, fuck it, I'm going to go ahead and do this anyway.
Yep.
And that decision is an immature decision. It's one that says that he either doesn't value that woman as much as he says he does, or I think more likely he doesn't understand how this will affect her.
Yeah, it's very interesting trying to understand what's going through men's minds and hearts when they decide to have an affair. I've watched some friends have affairs.
Not a lot of mind, Dan. Not a lot of mind. A lot of heart, a lot of genitalia, not a lot of mind, not a lot of prefrontal lobe going into those decisions. That's the problem.
I don't know about that. Because I think with a lot of these guys, I've watched some guys like really try to heal a marriage and then fall into an affair. I've watched some guys, the immaturity part, yes, I really get that. But these guys are feeling resentful. They're feeling rejected. They don't even know they're feeling rejected. They're feeling lonely. They feel like they don't understand how their behavior is impacting their sex life. So they just think their partner or their wife doesn't want to have sex with them. And so there's this cycling that happens and more disconnection and more an ability to say, well, she doesn't care about me. He
starts to build a case against her.
Absolutely. Builds the case. And what you did with your partner is really, whether it's with your partner, whether it's a confidant or, somebody,
wife.
You told on yourself, you interrupted that space and you shared the secret. And I had a guy in my life, he was talking about a woman in his work. He was talking about all the frustration he was feeling with his wife, how controlling. He had already made the case, but it was like, I'm trying to do this with her. She just won't respond. I'm trying to get her to go to couples counseling. She doesn't want to do that. She's being very controlling with the baby, all this sort of stuff.
So Dan, can I comment on this? This is the Rob Weiss out of the Doghouse response to what you're saying. And I have a hard time, I'm a guy, I want to be right, but I have a hard time believing that I'm wrong. And so you can tell me if you can convince me that I'm wrong here.
Sure.
I work with these men, they say, oh, my wife had a baby. She doesn't have sex with me anymore. She's gained all this weight and now all attention's on the kids. And it's like, I don't matter. And I'm working twice as hard and I'm exhausted all the time. And, oh, this woman at work and she's giving me all this attention and love, and all of a sudden I feel like maybe, and all that stuff. I get it. But my comment is, well, I have two of them, but here's one. Number one, if you're unhappy with your sex life in your marriage or committed relationship, if you're unhappy with your intimate life and your love life, go to therapy. Get a divorce, go play golf, go volunteer and help, underprivileged children. There are a lot of choices that a man can make when he's unhappy in his relationship other than cheat. It does seem to be a de facto kind of default place to go with many of the men I've worked with, that if their sex life is unhappy and they're frustrated with their spouse, the automatic default is, well, then it's kind of like the Ashley Madison, tagline, which is life is short. Have an affair, like you're unhappy in your relationship. Well, I have to say that being unhappy in your relationship, that's a growth opportunity.
Sure. And it's also part of being in a long-term relationship. It's bound to happen.
So I have to say that, I hear what you're saying, and I'm not sure if it's the same thing about these men are unhappy or are frustrated. But I was actually writing a blog about this yesterday because I'm writing a lot about cheating right now because of the book. And, I said in the blog, I would rather a guy divorced his spouse before cheating than keep secrets, lie, manipulate, and have her find out 3 years later that he's been living a whole separate life from her, because I guarantee you she'll be more devastated by the years of lying, secrecy, and manipulation than she will by, I'm unhappy and I'm leaving.
Let me do this, because I'm in full agreement with you, and I think I was going to a place with this story differently than maybe you thought.
Go for it.
So I'm going for a walk with this guy, and the truth is that he had numerous opportunities. I really actually opened up to him. I shared with him some of the frustrations and the struggles that I was having. He had numerous opportunities to talk about his interest in her, the fact that he was kind of already slipping into an emotional affair, that he was getting ready to go on break. I mean, he did not take advantage of the opportunity to share
Why?
with me in that moment what easily could have moved him in a different direction, like you
Why?
did with your partner or like somebody did. And that's the thing, is that by that point,
He didn't want to.
he had made a decision.
Yeah,
He,
I mean, you got to understand, like, I mean, I hear that too, and I would say again, that is a guy who's decided, God damn it, I'm going to go get laid, and I'm going to have this woman, whether my wife, he's
yeah,
already
absolutely.
made a decision, and he's already in the fuckets,
Absolutely.
and I'm looking for men to question when they start having these feelings towards someone else, or they start beginning to go in that direction, that they stop there and say, hey, something's going on. I better go home and talk about it. It might have to do with my spouse. It might just be about me. I don't know. If I just go act on it on my own, I may not make the best decision. And I think the guy who goes and cheats is the guy who wants to go and cheat, because there are many other choices that he could engage in. The other thing I wanted to say to you, and this is strictly to the man rules, Dan, is just that I hold a couple of man rules really high. How do I say this? There are a couple of rules about being a man that I think that define us in our best way.
Mm.
And that's my belief. And they are things like honesty, integrity,
Yes.
forthrightness. I will tell you what I think, even if it's uncomfortable. I think these are good traits that men bring. Women have them too, but these are some things we lead with.
Yes.
And I can see a man who has complete integrity in business, never betrays a contract, always meets his agreements, would never change a word that he had committed to with his boss or his coworkers, because that he is standing behind his word, and his word has meaning and it has integrity, and what he does is what he says, and what he says is what he does. But then when it comes to his spouse, he's like, oh yeah, I can go have that lap dance, because as long as she doesn't know, it doesn't matter. As if the contract and the agreement that he made with her, the integrity behind his word and who he is, doesn't matter as much with his spouse as it does with his male or female coworkers.
Absolutely.
And that's where I get kind of lost, because I'm thinking, well, what do we have but our word? What do we have but our integrity, really? And when you give that away in one area of your life, you're giving it away in your whole life.
I think that's so right on. And I think there's something unwritten for sure, but maybe even written in some places, that tells men, you get permission in some ways to not have to hold your marriage in the same level of importance. And you get the ability to act that way. It's not hypocritical to not have integrity in that space, because you don't need it. And I think there's so many things that fall into that.
But you're a man rules guy, Dan. So I would say to you, and I know you're agreeing with me, I just want to talk about this.
Yeah.
I don't think integrity or the truth is parsable. Like you can think, and a lot of guys will say this. Well, I hear this all the time with men who are cheating. I'm honest in every area of my life. I would never take money out of the paycheck. I would never, cheat my boss. I would never, do anything illegal. I'm a straight up guy. It's just cheating but I'm trustworthy except for the cheating,
Yeah.
and they believe that. And that even may be true in some weird way, although I think you can be partially trustworthy. I think you either are or you aren't. But a spouse will look at you, a woman will look at you who's thinking much more holistically, and she'll say, I'm sorry, but you lied to me, and you lied to me consistently. So why should I believe you when you say it's just about the women and the sex? Why? How do I know you're not lying about a whole bunch of other things? How do I know? And this is what women will say when they find out about the depth or length of the affair or the sexual acting out. They'll say things like, I don't know if anything we've ever had means anything to me now. I don't know if anything you say now I can trust. And I can't plan on anything in the future because I don't even know if what we've had was real. That's how much the betrayal of trust affects a woman in an intimate relationship. And yet he will say, well, I'm really trustworthy in every area of my life. I just go get lap dances occasionally.
Yeah. And I think that's such a powerful point. And that's what your book really, really brings home. I mean, it keeps going back to that core idea of, look, you lied. You betrayed a trust. Now make a decision to be in the marriage or not. And if you decide you're in the marriage, then you got some shit to clean up. And here's a way for you to do it. And to just kind of keep going back to that, because that betrayal of trust, I know a lot of guys who have experienced that too. I know a lot of guys who have kind of found out that their female partner was doing that whole kind of game and running that whole kind of game, and they were just heartbroken. And they could never, that betrayal of trust, I think, trust is such a human need, and it's so vulnerable and so fragile in many ways. And yet at the same time, like you're saying, it's kind of a no-brainer. Just show up as the way you need to in all areas of your life.
Well, this is the question I would ask, any guys who are listening, is that, I don't question your choosing or wanting to have an affair. And I don't, if you want to see a sex worker or you want to see an ex-girlfriend, I think it's perfectly fine as long as you run it by your woman. You have to go home and tell your wife or tell your girlfriend that you're thinking of dating someone else, or you're thinking of having a lap dance. And if it's okay with her, it's okay with me. And I think that is the right answer, because it's not your job or my job to say how a couple should conduct their life. They get to choose open relationship, closed relationship, all of that. And I have to tell you, and I'll give you an example with porn. I do believe, because I've done a fair amount of research about this, that there are a lot of women in intimate relationships that feel cheated on when their guy looks at a lot of porn.
Yeah.
They just feel like he's looking at women who are better looking, that he wants someone else. They get into, that's another issue we could take on at some point. But here's the contrast. A guy who has had a discussion with his spouse, occasionally, honey, I look at porn, and she says, well, I do too. And they have a healthy, intimate life, and it's kept from, children or visitors. Nobody really cares. And if she were to come across his porn on the computer when he wasn't home, she'd be curious. She might be embarrassed. She might be even a little angry that she doesn't look like those women, whatever it is. But she's not going to be furious. The woman who's furious is the woman who has no idea her husband ever looks at porn or her boyfriend ever does this. And she comes home one day and she goes on the computer and she finds this huge amount of porn and other women and pictures and webcam stuff. And she's like, wait a minute, why didn't I know about this? And what she's heard about is that he went off and kind of carried on this secret life without her. And I'm not saying, and I think it's really important, that we don't get to have a private life. Absolutely, in coupleships, you get to have your private life, your spouse does. I get asked this question. This is a great way of looking at this, I think. Sometimes I'm asked, well, when in a coupleship does, let's say, a wife or a girlfriend have the right to say, I want the passwords to all of your social media accounts, which in essence is saying, I want access to your private life.
Yeah.
And my answer to that is, while there's trust, you have no right to that. That's his private life. It's your private life. As long as you trust each other, you can live in those worlds and engage with other people. And you get to have that privacy. But once trust is broken, you get every one of those codes, because you no longer believe that he is walking the same line you are, or she is doing something that will back your relationship. And now you want to know. And I think that's kind of understandable, that when you lose trust in your partner, you now have the right to step up, wanting to learn more, know more, see more, not because you want to be some kind of detective or nag. It's interesting, Dan, when a woman, for example, does a lot of what I call detective work. She doesn't trust her guy, and she's going through his cell phone bills, and she's going through his browser history, and some women hire private detectives, and guys, of course, freak out. And what I say to them is, I think this woman is trying to find a way to trust you again. If she wanted to leave you, get rid of you, she would just do that. She is trying to figure out, is your word true now? Are you telling? She's wanting to check into your private life so that she can make sure that the guy she's with actually is the guy she's with. Before, she didn't have to worry about that because she trusted you. Now she doesn't trust you, but she wants to. And that's why she's looking at all this stuff. So when women get as upset and frustrated and focused and intense around a male partner who's cheated, I often see a woman who's desperately wanting to stay in that relationship and find a way to come to peace with what's happened, not leave.
So I knew that we would have lots to talk about, and I knew that there were so many topics that you and I could discuss. We're moving toward the end of this particular episode, so my hope is that you'll come back on. We can talk about some of these other topics, but we're at the point that I like to call the practical and the tactical. And you've given a lot of great tips, but let's say for any of our listeners, this isn't just about cheating and infidelity, right? This is about integrity in our relationships when there's all sorts of reasons that we can come up with, emotional and otherwise, not to practice that integrity. So what would be your 3 key takeaways for our listeners today that you can kind of really help them as they're navigating their own journey of intimacy and integrity in their relationships?
Well, and you're right, Dan. I think that there are many, we have a lot of topics to talk about. I want to talk about gay versus straight and how men, what gay men have in common with straight men. And we have a lot of stuff to talk about. But in terms of the real sort of takeaways for today, I would say one is that whether you're a man or a woman, when you find yourself increasingly dissatisfied with your spouse and you find yourself picking on them in your head, all of a sudden they're too fat or they fart too much or they're not spending time with you, and you find yourself distancing yourself from them. And then you also simultaneously see yourself being attracted to people in the workplace and people around you in the world that you hadn't been in the same way before. That's a big red light. What I've noticed is people tend to get into relationships and not really realize how far they've gone before they get there. I think it's really important to note when you're distancing yourself from your spouse for more than an hour or two or a day or two, and you're simultaneously finding other people attractive, it probably means that you need to start addressing it before it goes further. Another takeaway, I think, would be that no one is here to tell you how to live your sex life, how to live your romantic life, or how you and your partner should carry this out with each other. But whatever choices you make in your intimate relationship, they need to be shared with your spouse. The couples that get into trouble is when one person goes off and they say, well, I'll just go do this, and as long as the other person doesn't know, everything will be fine. And that is simply not true. And yeah, I think the third takeaway in a larger sense is that we're in a world right now where traditional masculine and traditional feminine values are really at odds with each other, and we're living in a very patriarchal culture that women are not happy about. And women have spent, the last 4 or 5 decades trying to teach us men how to be more empathic, compassionate, giving, all of those things. And that's not what our world is presenting today. And I think women are very unhappy about it, and rightly so.
Yeah. And I think men are very confused in many ways about what to choose in that space, how to choose it, and then even how to do it. Check out Rob's book, Out of the Doghouse. It really is a really great book. If you are someone who's been cheated on, if you're thinking of moving toward an affair, or even if you had an affair a long time ago and you're experiencing just kind of the ongoing emotional fallout from that behavior, this is a great book. So, Rob, how can people get a hold of you?
I'm easily found. My name is Robert Weiss. If you put my name in and the word sex, you'll probably find me. But my website is my name, robertweissmsw.com. My books are available on Amazon, Out of the Doghouse. I write extensively on sex addiction also and relationship dysfunction. And Dan, it's such a great opportunity to do this. I just wish you every success of the Man Rules. I think what you're doing is really needed. I hope you folks out there are ready for the next show and the next show and the one after that.
Thanks so much, Rob. I've appreciated all of your support over the years, not just as inviting me to write the foreword for your book, which was a real honor, but just the engagement you've shown for me and support for me and being able to get this message out there. And really, quite honestly, the shared conversation is one that I think you and I could have some really wonderful contributions about how a gay man and a straight man navigate relationship, as well as model that for others. So wonderful to have you. Thanks so much for the well wishes.
Yes, sir.
And we'll do more. See you soon.
All right, sir. Take good care. By the way, let me just do one quick thing.
Yeah.
I do this show called In the Rooms every week. And if there are people who want to interact with me or talk to me about sex relationship issues, I'm online on intherooms.com every Friday night at 6 o'clock California time. And you can come in and ask questions. You can come in and ask and see what other people are asking. We're talking about sex, relationships, addiction, and infidelity for an hour every Friday night at 6 o'clock California time on intherooms.com.
Intherooms.com. And this is really Rob's real intention to give back to a community that he cares so much about. So check it out and check out a way to interact with him in lots of different ways. So thanks again, Rob.
Be well, sir.
Thank you. You too. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Man Rules Podcast, where we don't let the rules rule us. If you have ideas for guests, topics, or even want to be a guest, send us an email at ideas@themanrules.com. And check out our website and everything we're up to at themanrules.com. The only question we have to ask is what kind of man you want to be and what's keeping you from being that man.